What happens when the person you promise to love, honor, and cherish discards you in front of the world as nothing more than the hired help? For Leticia Solano, the breaking point came with 6 soul-crushing words. Oh, her? She's just the nanny. In the opulent ballroom of a mansion she called home, her husband, Richard, swept her aside with a laugh. But what he didn't know, and what his glittering guests could never imagine, was that the real power was not in his bank account or his booming voice. It was hidden in a secret folder, on a name signed on a piece of paper that was about to make his entire world collapse. This is not just a story of revenge. It is a story of reclamation. The antiseptic scent and baby powder mingled in the air of the private suite at Mount Sinai Hospital. It was a smell that Elena Vance decided was the aroma of pure joy. In her arms, swaddled in matching blue and pink blankets, lay Leo and Lucy, her twin newborns, no more than 10 hours old. Every tiny breath they took seemed to synchronize with the beating of her own heart. After years of trying, of quiet sadnesses, and clinic disappointments, they were finally here. Her world, once a sprawling canvas of anxieties, had narrowed to this perfect, quiet moment. She adjusted Lucy's tiny cap, her fingers tracing the delicate curve of the baby's ear. Julian would be here any minute. Her husband, Julian Thorne of Thorne Corp., a man whose ambition had sculpted a new skyline for the city, was about to meet his son and daughter. She imagined his face, the way his guarded corporate facade would melt as he held them. He had been distant lately, stressed with a new acquisition in Lisbon, he had said. Late nights at the office, whispered phone calls. But this, she thought, this would change everything. The twins would be the glue, the anchor to draw his wandering attention back home. The opulent ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in Boston glowed under the crystal chandeliers. The annual Hayes Energy Gala gathered the cream of the American business sector, and Martin Hayes, at 42, with his distinguished bearing, should have been the perfect host. However, he remained by the bar, observing the guests with a glass of single malt scotch between his elegant tanned hands. His black Tom Ford suit accentuated his athletic physique, the result of years dedicated to tennis and swimming. His dark hair, perfectly slicked back, framed a face with sharp features, a strong jaw, a straight nose, and hazel eyes that had graced business magazine covers. He stood 6 feet 1 inch tall, and his presence commanded natural respect in any boardroom. But tonight, Martin felt absent from his own life. "Where is your wife?" Richard Mills, his minority partner, asked, approaching with a business smile. Martin glanced toward the ballroom entrance, where he expected to see Beatrice appear as she did every year. She always arrived punctually, radiant, effortlessly becoming the center of attention. But the minutes passed, and the chair next to him remained empty. "I suppose she was delayed," he murmured. Though he knew it was a lie, the truth was more complex and painful. That morning, as he fastened his platinum cufflinks in the dressing room of their Beacon Hill penthouse, he had heard Beatrice's soft voice from the bedroom. "Martin, are we going together tonight?" The question had sounded hopeful, almost timid. He had been so absorbed reviewing quarterly numbers on his phone that he barely looked up. "Of course, darling, as always." But when it was time to leave, Martin had already gone. An urgent call about the new wind farm in California had captured his full attention, and he had simply left, assuming Beatrice would follow, as she always did. Now, surrounded by the elegant murmur of Boston's high society, Martin began to realize his mistake. Beatrice Vance was 30 and possessed that serene beauty that needed no effort to stand out. Her light brown hair, with natural golden highlights, fell in soft waves to her shoulders. Her green eyes, large and expressive, reflected a quiet intelligence that had made Martin fall in love 7 years ago. She was tall, 5 feet 7 inches, with a natural elegance that made any dress look custom designed for her. She worked as an architect, specializing in sustainable design, and it was at an ecological construction conference that they first met. Martin had been fascinated not only by her beauty, but by the passion with which she spoke about creating spaces that respected the environment. But in the last 2 years, that mutual passion seemed to have faded between work meetings, business trips, and engagement dinners that Martin deemed more important than late-night conversations with his wife. The sound of heels on the marble pulled him from his thoughts. Turning, he saw a familiar figure crossing the ballroom with determination. It was Beatrice, but not as he remembered her. She wore a navy silk dress that enhanced her green eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a sophisticated bun that revealed the pearl necklace he had given her on their 3rd anniversary. She walked with her chin held high, but Martin could read the sadness in her eyes. Even from a distance, she approached him with measured steps, and for a moment Martin felt the urge to take her in his arms and apologize for leaving her alone once more. But pride and habit kept him rooted. "I thought you weren't coming," he said, trying to sound casual. "I thought the same of you," Beatrice replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But here we are. During dinner, they sat together as the perfect couple they pretended to be. Martin discussed projects with other businessmen, while Beatrice nodded politely, but he noticed her mind was elsewhere. Her hands, which used to seek his under the table, now remained still on her lap. After dessert, when the music started, Martin excused himself to take a call about a problem with wind turbines. It was his usual pattern: work before everything. When he returned, he saw something that left him paralyzed. Beatrice was standing by one of the ballroom columns, talking to a man he didn't recognize. He was elegant, perhaps their age, and wore an impeccably tailored gray suit. But what truly disturbed him was not the stranger's presence, but the genuine smile on his wife's face. It was the first time in months he had seen Beatrice smile that way, her eyes bright and her cheeks slightly flushed. The man said something that made her laugh naturally, and she responded with animated gestures Martin had forgotten she possessed. A burning, unknown fire ignited in his chest. Jealousy, pure and primitive jealousy that he hadn't felt since his college years. The thought that another man could awaken in Beatrice what he had lost filled him with a desperation he didn't know how to handle. He approached with firm steps, interrupting the conversation. "Beatrice, shall we go?" She looked at him surprised, as if she had forgotten he was there. The man politely excused himself and walked away, but Martin barely noticed. His whole world had narrowed to his wife's green eyes, and the distance that had grown between them without him realizing. During the drive back home, silence filled the interior of the Mercedes. Beatrice looked out the window at the Boston lights, and Martin drove with white knuckles on the steering wheel. "Who was that man?" he finally asked. "An architect from Charleston. We were discussing an ecological housing project. You seemed very comfortable with him." "It's been a long time since I had a real conversation with someone," she said in a soft but firm voice. "I forgot what it felt like." The words fell like a slab onto Martin's chest. Upon arriving home, Beatrice went straight upstairs to the bedroom without saying goodnight. He remained in his office, pretending to review reports, but in reality reliving every moment of the night. It was then that he realized he had been so busy building an empire that he had forgotten to care for the most valuable thing he had. 3 days later, as he ate breakfast alone in the granite kitchen of his penthouse, Beatrice sat across from him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Martin, I need to tell you something important." He looked up from the financial newspaper, noticing for the first time in weeks that she was wearing a cream-colored blouse that highlighted her golden skin, and that there was something different in her eyes. "I'm pregnant!" Martin's world stopped. The coffee cup slipped from his hands and shattered onto the white marble floor, creating a dark puddle neither of them moved to clean. Could the baby the woman who he had barely touched in recent months was carrying truly be his? The days following the pregnancy announcement became an emotional minefield. Martin tried to act normal, but every gesture from Beatrice, every prolonged silence, fueled the doubts gnawing at his mind like a slow poison. That Friday afternoon, as she prepared a chamomile tea in the kitchen, he watched her from the doorway of his office. Her movements were slower, more careful, and there was a special glow to her skin that he vaguely remembered from when his sister was pregnant. Beatrice wore a loose linen dress that concealed any change in her figure, but her hands rested instinctively on her still flat stomach. "How long have you known?" he asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them like an invisible wall. Beatrice didn't flinch, as if she had been expecting the question. 3 weeks, she replied, without turning around, focused on the steam rising from her cup. "I wanted to be sure before telling you." 3 weeks, Martin repeated, making mental calculations that tormented him. That means we conceived in early October." "Do you remember October, Martin?" she interrupted, finally turning to look at him. He did remember. It had been the month of the launch of the new solar energy division in Texas. He had traveled 4 times. He had held late-night meetings. He had come home exhausted most nights. But he also remembered one specific night after signing the most important contract of his career. He had arrived euphoric. He had uncorked a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne, and for the first time in months, he had seen his wife as something more than a familiar presence in his house. That night, they had made love with an intensity that had surprised them both, as if they were the same couple from 7 years ago. Martin had felt like he recovered the woman he had fallen in love with, and for a few hours, they had been them again. But the next day, work had absorbed him completely. "Of course I remember," he murmured, feeling relief mixed with guilt. "Seriously?" Beatrice's voice had a hint of irony he couldn't decipher. "Because the morning after, you left before I woke up and didn't return until 3 days later." The blow was accurate. Martin remembered having to fly urgently to London for a meeting with British investors. At the time, it had seemed like the right decision, the natural priority. Now he realized he had destroyed something fragile that had barely begun to be reborn. "Beatrice, you don't have to explain anything," she cut him off, but her voice sounded more tired than angry. "I already know what your priorities are." That night, Martin stayed up late in his office, pretending to review financial projections while actually reliving every detail of the past months. When was the last time he had asked Beatrice about her day? When was the last time they had dinner together without him constantly checking his phone? The architect from Charleston kept appearing in his thoughts like a threatening shadow. The ease with which he had made Beatrice smile obsessed him. There would have been other men, other moments he knew nothing about, because he was too busy building a future that now seemed fragile as glass. On Saturday morning, Beatrice announced she was going to the local market. It was a routine they had shared during the early years of their marriage, but that Martin had abandoned when weekends became extensions of the work week. "I'll go with you," he said, closing his laptop. Beatrice looked at him surprised, as if he had spoken a foreign language. "Don't you have meetings? It's Saturday. That has never stopped you before." The observation hurt because it was completely true. Martin had turned his schedule into a wall that separated him from the real world, including his own wife. The market was full of life, tourists mingling with locals, the aroma of cured meats and fresh produce. Beatrice moved between the stalls with familiarity, greeting vendors who knew her name. Martin realized there was a whole world in his wife's life that he was not a part of. "Mrs. Beatrice, how are you?" asked Maria, the fruit vendor, an older woman with a floral apron and a kind smile. "It's been a while since I saw you with your handsome husband." Martin felt a pang of shame, realizing the woman barely recognized him, despite Beatrice having shopped there for years. "Here he is," Beatrice replied with a forced smile. "Always very busy. Successful men always are," Maria chuckled, winking at Martin. "But don't forget that family is the most important thing, eh?" During the drive back, loaded with bags of fresh produce, Martin observed Beatrice with new attention. There was a serenity in her he hadn't noticed before, but also a deep sadness hidden behind her polite smiles. She was pregnant with his child, and he, instead of celebrating, was subjecting her to a silent interrogation full of unfounded suspicions. "Beatrice," he said when they reached the elevator of their building. "About the baby." She looked him directly in the eyes, and Martin saw something that completely disarmed him. Disappointment, not anger, not resentment, but a profound disappointment that seemed directed not only at him, but at what they had become as a couple. "What about the baby, Martin?" The question was simple but loaded with meaning. It was his chance to say what he really felt, to admit his fears, to apologize for allowing doubts to poison what should have been the happiest moment of their lives. But the words stuck in his throat. Pride, that curse of the Hayes men his father had instilled in him since childhood, paralyzed him. "Nothing," he murmured. "I was just wondering if you had thought of names yet." The lie floated between them like a toxic cloud. Beatrice nodded slowly, but Martin could see something break in her green eyes. "For a girl, I like Sophia," she said in a neutral voice. "For a boy, I thought of Diego." "Diego is a nice name," he commented as the elevator stopped on their floor. That night, as Beatrice slept next to him, Martin remained awake, staring at the ceiling. His hand instinctively moved toward his wife's belly, but stopped inches from touching her. Did he have the right to do so? Did he have the right to feel excitement about a baby when he had filled with doubt the moment she had given him the most important news of their lives? In the darkness of the bedroom, Martin Hayes, the man who had built an energy empire with unshakable determination, felt more lost than ever. And somewhere in his mind, the image of the architect from Charleston kept torturing him, fueling a distrust that was destroying the last remnants of their marriage. The first doctor's appointment arrived like a looming storm. For 3 weeks, Martin had avoided the topic, but when Beatrice mentioned the consultation with the gynecologist, he couldn't find an excuse not to accompany her. The Boston Medical Center was a modern building of glass and steel that reflected the morning light. Martin parked his Mercedes in the underground garage and walked next to Beatrice toward the elevators in a silence that had become habitual between them. She wore a fitted dress that accentuated her soft curves, and Martin noticed her waist had begun to slightly widen. Her low-heeled shoes, unusual for her, betrayed the small changes the pregnancy was bringing to her body. In the waiting room, surrounded by other couples speaking in excited whispers, the tension between them was palpable. Beatrice flipped through a decorating magazine while Martin pretended to check emails on his phone. But in reality, he observed the other couples with a mix of envy and unease. "Mrs. Vance," called a middle-aged nurse in an impeccable white coat. Dr. Carmen Hayes was a woman in her 50s, hair pulled back in a professional bun, and designer glasses that gave her an air of calm competence. Her consultation room was decorated with framed diplomas and photographs of babies she had delivered. "Is this your first child?" she asked, as Beatrice settled onto the examination table. "Yes," Beatrice replied, and Martin noted the contained excitement in her voice. "And you, Mr. Hayes, nervous?" Martin nodded, although nervous was an understatement for the whirlwind of emotions consuming him. When the doctor applied the cold gel to Beatrice's abdomen and turned on the ultrasound monitor, his heart began to beat violently. The screen filled with gray shadows and blurred lines that made no sense to him. But the doctor smiled with professional knowledge. "There he is," she murmured, pointing to a small shape in the center of the image. "Do you see him? That blinking dot is the heart." Martin stepped closer to the screen, and suddenly he could see it. A tiny human being, no bigger than a bean, but with a heart that beat with rhythmic determination. His heart. The emotion hit him like a wave. For weeks he had been torturing himself with doubts, but in that moment, looking at that blurred black and white image, he felt something primal and undeniable, pure paternal love. "According to the measurements, I'd say you're 11 weeks along," the doctor continued. "That places conception in the first days of October. It matches your calculations." Martin exchanged a look with Beatrice. October, the night of the Dom Perignon champagne, when they had briefly recovered the passion they thought lost. "Yes," Beatrice replied softly. "It matches perfectly." The doctor printed several copies of the ultrasound and handed them over with a smile. "Everything looks perfect. The baby is the right size, and the heartbeat is strong. Do you have any questions?" During the drive back home, Martin drove with a copy of the ultrasound in the passenger seat next to Beatrice. The image of the baby had stirred something deep within him, but it had also intensified his confusion. "It's real," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Were you doubting it was?" Beatrice's question had an edge he knew well. It was her way of confronting problems head-on, without pretense. "That's not it," he lied. "It's just overwhelming." That afternoon, Martin locked himself in his office with the ultrasound in his hand. He studied it for hours, as if it were a financial report he could decipher with enough analysis. His son, his blood, his legacy. But the doubts remained, like a poison refusing to leave his system. On Monday morning, as he ate breakfast alone, Beatrice had started having breakfast in bed due to morning sickness. He received a call that would change the course of events. "Martin, it's Edward Morrison from the firm." Edward had been his lawyer for years, a meticulous man who handled all the company's legal affairs with discreet efficiency. "What is it, Edward?" "I have the information from that personal consultation you requested." Martin felt his blood run cold. 2 weeks ago, in a moment of weakness and paranoia, he had asked Edward to discreetly investigate Beatrice's movements over the past few months. It had been a vile impulse he regretted immediately, but it was too late to stop it. "Well, your wife has been regularly attending prenatal yoga classes at a center near the park. She has also visited several specialized maternity bookstores. She had lunch twice with her sister Elena, and once with her mother. And..." Edward paused, raising Martin's nerves to the maximum tension. "And what else?" "Last Thursday, she had lunch at the Beacon Hill Bistro with a man. According to my investigator, the conversation seemed friendly but professional. They reviewed documents and architectural plans." The architect from Charleston. Martin closed his eyes and felt his world reel. "Did you identify the man?" "Alejandro Castillo, an architect specializing in sustainable projects, has offices in Charleston and Boston. Apparently they are collaborating on an ecological housing project on the outskirts of the city. Work. Just work." But why hadn't Beatrice mentioned the project to him? Because she had kept her meetings with Castillo a secret. "Anything else?" "That's all, Martin." If I may offer a personal observation, your wife leads a very quiet life, centered on her pregnancy. There is nothing to suggest. Thank you, Edward. Send me the full report. After hanging up, Martin stared out his office window at the Boston skyline. Glass skyscrapers rose under a gray autumn sky, mirroring his mood. Why had he ordered that investigation? What kind of man was capable of spying on his own pregnant wife? But at the same time, why hadn't Beatrice told him about her meetings with Castillo? That night, during dinner, grilled salmon that Beatrice barely tasted due to her nausea, he decided to approach the subject indirectly. How are your work projects going? Beatrice looked up from her plate, surprised by the sudden interest. Fine. I have some interesting proposals. Anything in particular? There was an almost imperceptible pause before she responded. A sustainable housing project. Very innovative. Are you working alone or with someone else? This time the pause was longer, and Martin saw something that alarmed him, a subtle flush on his wife's cheeks. I'm collaborating with a colleague from Charleston, she finally said. His name is Alejandro. The name fell between them like a stone, dropped into a calm pond. Martin felt all his suspicions spring to life with renewed force. Is he the same man from the gala? Beatrice nodded slowly, and at that moment, Martin knew they had reached the point of no return in their marriage. The confrontation came 3 days later. On a night of torrential rain that lashed against the penthouse windows, Martin had spent those 2 hours in a state of constant agitation, analyzing Beatrice's every gesture, every word, every silence, seeking signs of a betrayal his mind had constructed as a certainty. Beatrice was on the living room sofa, legs tucked under an ivory cashmere blanket, reading a book about child development. The warm light from the floor lamp accentuated the subtle changes in her face, the slightly rounder cheeks, the skin's special pregnancy glow, the lips that looked fuller. She wore a pale pink silk negligee that delicately hugged her new curves. Martin watched her from the doorway with a glass of Macallan 25-year-old in his hand, and Edward's report folded in the inner pocket of his dark gray cashmere jacket. His heart hammered like a war drum. How long have you been seeing him? The words left his mouth before he could stop them, loaded with an accusation that cut the air like a knife. Beatrice looked up from the book slowly, and Martin saw the calmness drain from her green eyes. What are you talking about? About Alejandro Castillo, the architect from Charleston. How long have you been having lunch with him behind my back? You've been spying on me. There was no denial. There was no feigned surprise, only a direct question that confirmed all of Martin's suspicions. I needed to know the truth, he replied, taking a step into the living room. I needed to know who my wife is with when I'm not around. Your wife is working. Beatrice's voice rose for the first time in months. Your wife is trying to maintain her professional career while expecting a child. Your wife is trying to build something of her own because her husband has been treating her like just another piece of furniture in this perfect house for 2 years. The words hit Martin like bullets, but pride and jealousy had taken control of his reason. And you need to meet him alone to work in intimate restaurants reviewing blueprints as if they were love letters. Beatrice stood up abruptly, and the blanket fell to the floor. Her negligee tightened over her slightly prominent abdomen, reminding Martin of what was truly at stake. Love letters! Her voice trembled with disbelief and contained rage. Martin, are you accusing me of having an affair? The silence that followed was deafening. The rain hammered against the windows with renewed force, as if nature wanted to underscore the storm raging inside the apartment. I don't know what to think, he finally murmured. We've been strangers living under the same roof for months. You barely talk to me. You don't touch me. And that's your conclusion? Beatrice walked toward him with slow, deliberate steps. That because another man listens to me, because he treats me like a competent professional and not a decorative accessory, there must be something romantic between us. The baby. What about the baby, Martin? Her voice cracked slightly. Say it. Say what you really think. Martin looked into her eyes and saw pain, pure, deep pain, that he had caused with his suspicions, with his doubts, with his inability to trust the woman he had chosen to share his life with. Is he mine? The two words floated in the air like a deadly poison. Beatrice recoiled, as if she had received a physical slap, instinctively raising her hands to her belly in a protective gesture. How dare you? She whispered. And there was something broken in her voice that made Martin realize the magnitude of his mistake immediately. Beatrice, how dare you question your own child? Tears began to stream down her cheeks, but her voice remained firm. Do you know what I've been living these months? Do you know how alone I've felt while waiting for the man I love to look at me, touch me, treat me as something more than an impediment to his perfectly planned schedule? Martin reached out a hand toward her, but Beatrice pulled away with a gentle but firm movement. Don't touch me. You have no right to touch me after this. Beatrice, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you hired a detective to follow me? That you doubt the paternity of your son because your wife has work meetings? That you'd rather believe I'm capable of betraying you than acknowledge that you have destroyed our marriage with your indifference? Every word was a hammer blow against Martin's chest. He realized he had been so obsessed with searching for evidence of a non-existent betrayal that he had ignored the real betrayal, his own toward the love they had built together. I love you, he said desperately. No, Beatrice replied with a devastating calmness. You love the idea of me. You love having a beautiful wife at social events. You love the status of being married to a renowned architect. But me, the real woman carrying your child, you stopped seeing that woman a long time ago. She turned toward the stairs leading to the bedroom, but stopped on the first step without turning back. Alejandro listens to me when I talk about my projects. He asks about my ideas. He treats me like a competent professional. And yes, it makes me smile, because I had forgotten what it felt like to be valued for my mind, and not just my looks. But never, not for a second, did it occur to me to betray you. Because despite everything, despite your coldness, despite your absence, despite treating me like a stranger for 2 years, I still believed the man I fell in love with was still there somewhere, beneath all that ambition and pride. She went up 2 more steps before adding, I was wrong. That night, Martin stayed on the living room sofa, staring at the blanket Beatrice had dropped, inhaling the soft scent of her perfume that still clung to the fabric. Upstairs, he could hear the muffled sound of her sobbing through the ceiling, and each moan was like a knife driving deeper into his heart. He had achieved what he feared most. He had lost his wife, and worst of all, he had lost himself in the process. The dawn arrived, gray and silent, at the Beacon Hill penthouse. Martin had spent the night awake on the sofa, alternating between repentance and obstinance, between the desire to go up and apologize and the wounded pride that kept him motionless. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Beatrice's devastated expression when he questioned if the baby was his. At 7 a.m., he heard movement upstairs, soft but determined footsteps, the sound of drawers opening and closing, the dragging of a suitcase across the marble floor. His heart hammered with a terrible premonition. When Beatrice came down the stairs, Martin felt the world reel. She wore a camel wool coat that concealed her figure and dragged a brown leather suitcase he had given her for their honeymoon in Santorini. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her expression was one of determination he had never seen. Where are you going? She didn't answer immediately. She walked to the kitchen and poured water into a glass, drinking it slowly as if she needed time to find the right words. "To my mother's house in Savannah," she finally said without looking at him. "I need space to think. Beatrice, please, can we talk about this?" "Talk?" She turned to him, and Martin saw that although she had cried all night, her gaze had hardened. "When was the last time we really talked, Martin? When was the last time you asked me how I felt, what I thought, what I dreamed?" He opened his mouth to reply, but realized he had no answer. The last 2 years had been an endless parade of superficial conversations about schedules, social events, and mutual obligations. "You can't leave now. You're pregnant. You need medical care." "Savannah has excellent doctors. My mother is a midwife. She cared for my sister during her 3 pregnancies." The mention of his mother-in-law, Carmen Vance, a 60-year-old woman with a strong character and clear opinions on her daughter's marriage, sent a chill down Martin's spine. Carmen had never hidden her disapproval of Martin's long hours and absence from important family events. "How long?" "I don't know. The time I need to decide if I want to stay married to you." The words hit like a punch. Martin had contemplated divorce in his darkest moments of doubt, but hearing it from Beatrice's lips made him grasp the reality of what he could lose. "Beatrice, yesterday I was confused, jealous. I said terrible things I didn't really mean." "You didn't mean them?" She approached him, and for the first time in 24 hours, she looked him directly in the eyes. "Martin, you asked me if your child was truly yours. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't a moment of confusion. It was the culmination of weeks of suspicion, of investigations behind my back, of treating your pregnant wife like a criminal." He reached out a hand to her face, but she pulled away with a soft but firm movement. "Don't touch me. You have no right to touch me after this." "I know he's mine," he murmured. "I knew it from the moment I saw the ultrasound. It was stupid. It was unforgivable." The silence stretched between them like an abyss. Martin desperately searched for the words that could stop her, that could repair the damage done. "And if you need anything, if there's a medical emergency, I'll call my doctor or my sister or my mother." Every option she mentioned was like a stab. "I no longer need you to take care of me, Martin. I learned to do it alone these last few months." Beatrice walked toward the door, dragging her suitcase. Martin followed her like a wounded animal, searching for anything that could change the course of events. "You'll call." She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. "When I'm ready to talk to you as the father of my child, I'll call you. But as a husband, I don't know if we'll ever be ready for that conversation. I love you." The words came out in desperation, but Beatrice shook her head slowly. "Love without trust is not love, Martin. It's obsession. It's possession. It's everything our marriage has become." She left without looking back. Martin remained in the doorway, watching as her Audi disappeared into the morning traffic. The penthouse, which had always seemed like a sanctuary of success and sophistication, suddenly felt like a cold, empty tomb. For the next few hours, Martin wandered the rooms like a ghost. The bedroom still smelled of Beatrice's soft perfume, a scent of jasmine and vanilla he had chosen for her in Paris during their 2nd anniversary. His side of the closet showed empty spaces where her favorite dresses once hung. In the bathroom, her electric toothbrush, her imported French moisturizers, and the body oil she used after showering were missing, small absences that added up to create an overwhelming void. He tried to immerse himself in work, but the numbers on his computer screen blurred. He canceled 3 important meetings and ignored the insistent calls from Richard, his partner, who wanted to discuss the expansion to Portugal. At sunset, as the sun hid behind the city skyscrapers, Martin found himself standing by the living room window with a glass of wine in one hand and his mobile phone in the other. He had dialed Beatrice's number 5 times, but always hung up before it rang. What would he say? How could he explain that the fear of losing her had led him exactly to that? Losing her? The irony was bitter and perfect. The man who had built an empire based on quick decisions and accurate analyses had destroyed the most valuable thing in his life because of his inability to trust the woman he loved most. That night, lying in a bed that seemed infinitely large and cold, Martin Hayes realized that professional success meant nothing if he didn't have someone to share it with. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt completely alone. The road to redemption, the Savannah chapter. The months following Beatrice's departure became a nightmare of endless days and empty nights. Martin tried to maintain the facade of normalcy at work, but those who knew him well noticed the changes. The pronounced dark circles, the weight loss, the distracted manner in which he led meetings he once controlled with military precision. It was March, 4 months after the separation, when Richard Mills decided to confront him. They were in the main office of Hayes Energy in Boston, a glass and steel building that reflected the gray New England sky. The boardroom was empty after a disastrous presentation to Japanese investors. "Martin, this cannot continue," Richard said. "You just lost the most important contract of the year because your mind was elsewhere." "The Japanese were too demanding with deadlines," Martin muttered. "The Japanese were perfect for us, and you know it," Richard countered. "When was the last time you spoke to Beatrice?" The name of his wife fell into the room like a stone, dropped into a quiet pond. Martin closed his eyes, feeling the familiar chest pain that accompanied him every day since November. "I haven't spoken to her in 4 months. Martin, she's pregnant with your child. She made it very clear she didn't want to hear from me, and you simply accepted it." Richard's voice had a note of disbelief. "The Martin Hayes I know doesn't give up so easily. You built this empire from scratch because you never accepted no for an answer." Martin walked to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a photograph of the ultrasound he kept like a painful treasure. The blurred image of his son, who must now measure several inches more and have more defined features. "It's not that simple, Richard. I said things. I did unforgivable things, like—" The silence stretched for long seconds before Martin found the courage to confess. "I doubted the baby was mine. I hired a detective to follow her. I accused her of having an affair." Richard let out a low whistle and sank into one of the brown leather chairs. "My God, Martin. Why?" "Because I'm a proud idiot who preferred to believe in a non-existent betrayal rather than acknowledge that I had neglected the most important woman in my life." It was the first time Martin had fully verbalized his mistake, and the words came out charged with a pain that had been gnawing at his soul for months. "And now what are you going to do? Are you going to stay here feeling miserable while your son grows up without knowing you?" "She doesn't want to see me." "Have you asked her recently?" Martin shook his head. The truth was, he had dialed Beatrice's number hundreds of times, but always hung up before it rang. The fear of rejection, of contempt in her voice, paralyzed him. "Her sister Elena called me last week," he finally admitted. "And what did she tell you?" "That Beatrice is doing well, that the baby is growing perfectly, that they have prepared a room in her mother's house for when he is born, and that Beatrice asks about me sometimes, but that she's too hurt to take the first step." Richard leaned forward, eyes gleaming with understanding. "Then you take the first step, you idiot. Go to Savannah, fight for your family. What if she rejects me? What if it's too late? What if it isn't? Are you going to spend the rest of your life wondering?" That night, in the overwhelming silence of his penthouse, Martin sat in front of his laptop and did something he hadn't done in months. He searched for information about Beatrice, not through private detectives, but openly, honestly. Her professional website showed she had been actively working from Savannah. She had designed 2 sustainable housing projects for a local firm, and her designs had won a National Ecological Architecture Award. Her professional photo showed her radiant, with slightly longer hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. On social media, she had posted some photos of Savannah, the cathedral at sunset, courtyards full of jasmine, plates of homemade Southern food. But there were no images of her belly, no mentions of the pregnancy, no references to her personal life. Martin enlarged a photograph where Beatrice appeared in a park, sitting on a bench under a blooming orange tree. She wore a loose coral dress that didn't reveal her condition. But there was something in her posture, the way her hands rested on her lap, that suggested a mother's instinctive protection. What would his son be like now? Would he have his dark hair or Beatrice's golden highlights, his hazel eyes or his mother's green ones? Could she already feel his movements in her womb? The pain of missing all those moments intensified until it was unbearable. The next day, Martin did something he hadn't done in years. He canceled all his meetings for the week. He told his assistant, Carmen, that he would be out on urgent personal business. Then he went to his closet and packed a suitcase with comfortable clothes, very different from his usual suits. But as he was about to close the suitcase, he stopped. What right did he have to show up in Savannah unannounced? What right did he have to interrupt the peace Beatrice had found away from him? He sat on the edge of the bed and picked up his mobile phone. This time, he didn't hang up when he dialed her number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as he was about to hang up, he heard her voice. "Martin," just his name, but spoken with a mixture of surprise, caution, and something that might have been hope. "Hello, Beatrice." His voice came out rougher than intended. "I know I have no right to call you, but I need to know how you are." There was a pause that felt eternal. "I'm fine. The baby is fine. I'm glad." A tear rolled down his cheek uncontrollably. "Beatrice, Martin, not over the phone. If you truly want to talk to me, if you truly want to be part of your son's life, you'll have to come here. You'll have to prove that this is more important to you than your pride." The line went dead, leaving Martin with the phone in his hand and his heart pounding as if he had run a marathon. But for the first time in months, he felt something akin to hope. The train ride to Savannah lasted 4 hours, but for Martin, it felt like an eternity. He had chosen to travel by train instead of using the company's private jet. He needed time to think, to mentally prepare himself for what could be the most important encounter of his life. He wore a white linen shirt without a tie, navy chinos, and brown leather shoes without socks. It was the most casual version of himself he had shown in years, a conscious attempt to shed the corporate armor he had used to keep the world at bay. In his leather briefcase, he carried something more valuable than any contract, the divorce papers he had prepared months ago and never had the courage to sign. There was also an apology letter he had rewritten 12 times during the trip, trying to find the words that could express the magnitude of his regret. Savannah welcomed him with humid warmth and the scent of jasmine that filled the narrow streets of the historic district. He had booked a room at the Perry Lane Hotel, but first he needed to scope out the area. He needed to see the place where Beatrice had rebuilt her life without him. Carmen Vance's house was in the Victorian district, a traditional Southern home with a white clapboard facade and wrought iron railings on the windows. Red geraniums spilled from the planters on the first-floor balcony, and a purple bougainvillea climbed up one of the side walls. Martin parked the rental Mercedes on the corner and watched the house for an hour, like an inverted private detective, waiting to glimpse the woman who had been his life for 7 years. At 5 p.m., the front door opened, and Carmen Vance appeared. She was a robust woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a low bun, and a floral dress that made her look maternal and formidable at the same time. She carried a straw bag and walked with the determination of someone who knew her neighborhood like the back of her hand. 20 minutes later, just as Martin had decided he should approach and knock on the door, he saw something that made his heart stop. Beatrice walked out of the house. She wore a loose, pale green cotton maternity dress that sweetly draped over her belly, now prominent and round beneath the fabric. Her hair had grown longer and was tied back in a loose braid that fell over her right shoulder. Even from a distance, Martin could see the special glow on her skin that pregnancy had accentuated. She walked with the slow, careful grace of a woman 7 months into her pregnancy, one hand resting protectively on her belly, while the other held a wicker handbag. Martin got out of the car without thinking, driven by an impulse stronger than fear or reason. Beatrice turned abruptly, and for a moment that felt eternal, they looked at each other in silence. Beatrice's green eyes filled with surprise, and something more complex that Martin couldn't decipher. "You came," she murmured, and there was genuine astonishment in her voice. "You told me to come." Beatrice studied him from head to toe, noticing his casual attire, the absence of the corporate armor he always wore like a second skin. "You look different. Many things have changed." A bus stopped at the nearby corner, but Beatrice made no move to take it. Passengers got on and off, and the vehicle pulled away, leaving them alone on the street corner shaded by live oaks. "How did you know where to find me?" "Elena gave me the address months ago, but I didn't dare come." "And what changed?" Martin looked her directly in the eyes, and for the first time in his adult life, he allowed all his vulnerability to show unfiltered. "I realized that I would rather risk your rejection than continue living without you and our son." Beatrice placed her free hand on her abdomen in an unconscious gesture, and Martin followed the movement with his gaze. He extended his hand timidly toward her belly. She hesitated for a few seconds, that felt like hours. Then she nodded, almost imperceptibly. When Martin's palm rested on Beatrice's abdomen, he felt a strong, immediate kick, as if his son had been waiting for that moment of connection. The emotion hit him like a wave, pure love, instinctive protection, and a devastating guilt for all the lost time. "He's strong," he whispered, his voice choked. "Like his father," Beatrice replied softly. "He never stops moving, especially at night." "Do you know what he is?" "A boy, Diego, as we discussed." The name hit Martin like an unexpected gift. Throughout all those months of separation, Beatrice had kept the name they had chosen together, as if she had preserved a piece of the family they had been building. "Beatrice, he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Not here, Martin. Not in the street." She looked around, noticing the curious glances of passing neighbors. In a neighborhood like the Victorian district, the appearance of an elegant outsider next to Carmen Vance's pregnant daughter would not go unnoticed. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" Beatrice hesitated, clearly wrestling with contradictory emotions. Finally, she pointed toward the river, the park along the Savannah River. "But Martin," her voice slightly hardened, "don't mistake this for forgiveness. I came because I need to hear what you have to say for Diego. But between you and me, I don't know if what was broken can be repaired." They walked in silence toward the river, maintaining a cautious distance between them. Martin watched Beatrice out of the corner of his eye, noticing how she had blossomed during the pregnancy. There was a serenity in her he didn't remember from before, as if she had found an inner strength she hadn't known she possessed. Forsyth Park stretched green and shaded by live oaks near the water. They sat on a bench under the palm trees, with the murmur of the river in the background, and the sunset painting the sky orange and pink. "Why now, Martin? Why after so much time?" He pulled the crumpled letter from his pocket and handed it to her. "Because I realized I've been living like a dead man these past months. Because work no longer gives me satisfaction when I have no one to share the achievements with. Because I wake up every day thinking about our son and everything I'm missing." Beatrice unfolded the letter, but did not read it immediately. "And you think with a letter you can erase what happened? Do you think you can just show up here and everything will go back to how it was?" "No," he replied with brutal honesty. "I know I can't erase the damage I caused, but I need to try to build something new, something better. For Diego, for you, for us." A gentle breeze moved the palm leaves, and in the distance, the cathedral bells chimed 6 p.m. "Read it," Martin said softly, "and then decide if I deserve a second chance, or if I should disappear from your life forever. The birth and the promise of the home." Beatrice read the letter in silence as the Savannah sunset painted the sky. Impossible colors. Her eyes moved slowly across the lines Martin had written in his own hand, words that had flowed from the deepest part of his wounded soul. "Beatrice, there are no words sufficient to apologize for what I did. I failed you as a husband, as a partner, as the man who promised to love and protect you forever. I doubted you when I should have fought for us. I investigated you as if you were a stranger when you are the most honest woman I know. I accused you of betrayal when the only real betrayal was mine. Betraying the love we built together with my pride, my fears, and my inability to be vulnerable with you. I don't come to ask you to forget. I come to ask you to allow me to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I can be the man you deserved from the beginning. I have made decisions that will change everything. I have put Richard in charge of the company's daily operations in Boston. I want to open an office here in Savannah to be close to my family. I want to be the father our son deserves and the husband you need." When she finished reading, Beatrice folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her wicker handbag. "Nice words, Martin, but I can no longer live on promises. They are not empty promises." He moved slightly closer to her on the bench. "I've already started making changes. Richard has executive power as of last week. I've been looking for offices here in Savannah, in the historic district." Beatrice looked at him with genuine surprise. "Seriously?" "Seriously. I have 3 appointments to view spaces tomorrow morning." "And what if it's too late? And if I've changed so much these months that I'm no longer compatible with the man you were, or even with the man you say you want to be?" The question fell between them like a silent bomb. "Have you changed?" he asked softly. Beatrice smiled for the first time since he had found her. A small, genuine smile. "A lot. I discovered I could be a single mother if necessary. I discovered I could build a professional career without needing anyone else's validation. I discovered I could be happy, even with a broken heart." "I'm glad," he said, and he meant it. "You were always stronger than I knew how to see. And have you truly changed? Or are you just afraid of losing what you took for granted for years?" "At first it was fear," he admitted. "Fear of being alone. Fear of losing my son. Fear that the world would see my failure as a husband. But later I realized I had been living the wrong life. Building an empire that meant nothing without you. Accumulating success that felt empty when I came home and had no one to share it with." Diego chose that moment to deliver an especially strong kick, and Beatrice winced, mixing pain and tenderness. "Can I?" Martin reached out his hand toward her belly again. This time, she didn't hesitate. When he placed both hands on her abdomen, he felt a series of strong, determined movements. "He's strong," Beatrice murmured, watching the look of astonishment on Martin's face. "Like his father," she replied. "He never stops moving, especially at night." "I've missed so much." "Yes," Beatrice said without cruelty, just honesty. "You've missed the first kicks, the ultrasounds, where you see his little face, the nights I stayed awake with his acrobatics. You've missed choosing the crib, decorating his room, feeling my body change to make room for him." I can see his room." Beatrice studied him for long seconds, as if evaluating not only the request, but the intentions behind it. "My mother isn't home. She went to the market and then has a doctor's appointment. She'll be out until 9 p.m. It was a cautious invitation, but an invitation nonetheless. They walked back toward the house in the quiet of the sunset. Carmen Vance's house was cozy inside, with dark wood furniture, family photographs in silver frames, and the lingering scent of jasmine. "His room is upstairs," Beatrice said, beginning to climb the stairs with the careful slowness of advanced pregnancy. Diego's room was small, but perfect. The walls were painted a soft blue with forest animal borders. There was a white wooden crib next to the window, a cream-upholstered rocking chair, and a dresser full of tiny, carefully folded clothes. Martin approached the crib and ran his hand over the mattress that would soon cradle his son. "When are you due?" "In 6 weeks, early May." 6 weeks. Martin felt a mix of panic and excitement. His son would be born in spring, under the southern sun, in a house filled with female love. Beatrice turned to him. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know I've lost the privilege of being here, but would you let me be present when Diego is born?" He sat heavily in the rocking chair, and for the first time since he had found her, he seemed completely vulnerable. "I don't know, Martin. Honestly, I don't know." 2 weeks later, Martin had settled into a routine he never would have imagined possible. Every morning, he had breakfast at the local cafe, checked emails from the temporary office he had rented in the historic district, and in the afternoons, he casually walked through the Victorian district, hoping to run into Beatrice. He didn't pressure her. He didn't show up at her mother's door. He simply made himself visible, letting her decide whether to interact or not. It had been an intuitive strategy that was slowly working. 3 times they had met by chance at the market, twice in the park by the river, and once at the local bookstore, where she had gone to buy books on breastfeeding. Their conversations were cautious but increasingly less tense. They talked about the baby, about Savannah, about everything except the future of their relationship. That April afternoon, as the warmth of the southern spring grew intense, Martin was reviewing plans for the new office in a cafe near the cathedral when his phone rang. "Martin!" It was Elena, Beatrice's sister, but her voice was strained. "Elena, what's wrong?" "Beatrice is at the hospital. She started having contractions this morning, but we thought they were false. Now they say Diego is going to be born today." Martin's world reeled. He stood up so abruptly that he knocked over his coffee cup, creating a dark stain on the architectural plans. "What hospital?" "St. Joseph's, Candler. Maternity floor." "Martin, she asked for you." St. Joseph's, Candler was a modern complex in the south of Savannah. Martin drove through the narrow streets of the historic district with a mix of panic and emotion that made his hands tremble. When he arrived at the maternity floor, he found Elena in the waiting room along with Carmen Vance. Martin's mother-in-law looked at him with an expression that mixed disapproval with resignation. "How is she?" he asked breathlessly. "Fine," Elena replied, "but she's a first-time mother and labor is slow. She's been in labor for 6 hours." Carmen got up from the blue plastic chair where she had been waiting and approached Martin with the determination of a woman who had made a decision. "Mr. Hayes," her voice had the formal tone she reserved for serious occasions, "my daughter has spent these months raising your grandson alone, preparing to be a single mother if necessary. She has been brave, independent, and strong." Martin nodded, feeling he was preparing for a verdict. "But," Carmen continued, "a child needs his father, and my daughter, though she is too proud to admit it, still loves you." The words fell on him like an unexpected blessing. "Can I see her?" "Room 314. "But Martin," Carmen placed a surprisingly firm hand on his arm, "if you walk in there, it's to stay, not to play the worried husband during a crisis and then disappear again. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am, I understand perfectly." Room 314 was down a hall that smelled of disinfectant and had walls decorated with children's drawings. Martin paused outside the partially open door, taking a deep breath before entering. Beatrice was in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors showing Diego's heartbeat and the intensity of her contractions. She wore a pale blue hospital gown that made her look both vulnerable and powerful. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was glistening with sweat. "Hello," he said softly from the doorway. She turned to him, and Martin saw genuine relief in her green eyes. "You came?" "Of course I came." He approached the bed just as a contraction hit her. Beatrice closed her eyes and breathed deeply, and Martin felt the desperate urge to help her somehow. "Can I do anything?" "Give me your hand," she murmured, extending hers toward him. When their fingers intertwined, Martin felt the force of the contraction through her grip. Beatrice squeezed his hand with an intensity that made him grasp the magnitude of what she was enduring. "How much longer?" he asked when the contraction passed. "The doctor says a few more hours. Diego is stubborn, like his father." Despite the pain, there was a flicker of the humor Martin remembered from the early years of their marriage. "Beatrice, she interrupted him softly. "No, not now. Just stay with me. Just be here." The next 3 hours were the most intense of Martin's life. He watched Beatrice go through waves of pain that transformed her, taking her to a primitive, powerful place where he couldn't follow. But he could be there. He held her hand, wiped the sweat from her brow, whispered words of encouragement when the contractions became overwhelming. "I can see the head," announced Dr. Morrison, a middle-aged woman with a reassuring voice. "One more push, Beatrice. Just one more." Martin looked where the doctor pointed and saw something that changed his perception of reality forever. The dark crown of his son emerging into the world. "Push!" the doctor shouted. Beatrice sat up with a strength she didn't know she had, squeezing Martin's hand until it almost broke, and pushed with all her might. And then Diego was there, small, wrinkled, covered in alien-looking substances, but absolutely perfect. His lungs filled with air, and he let out a loud, indignant cry that filled the room. "He's beautiful," the doctor whispered, placing the baby on Beatrice's chest. 10 fingers on his hands, 10 on his feet, and magnificent lungs. "Do you want to cut the cord, Dad?" a nurse asked, offering him surgical scissors. "Dad." The word echoed in his head like a bell. With trembling hands, Martin cut the cord that had connected Diego to Beatrice for 9 months, separating them physically, but uniting them forever as mother and son. "Would you like to hold him?" the doctor asked, after cleaning and weighing the baby. Martin held out his arms, and when Diego was placed against his chest, the world stopped. His son was surprisingly light, warm, and smelled of something indefinable, but perfect. Diego opened his eyes for the first time, dark eyes that looked at him with the ancient wisdom of all newborns. And Martin knew that not only a child had been born, but a new version of himself. "Hello, Diego," he murmured, tears streaming freely down his face. "I'm your dad, and I've been waiting for you all my life." Beatrice watched them from the bed, exhausted but radiant. And in her eyes, Martin saw something he hadn't seen in months. Pure, unreserved love. In that moment, holding his newborn son, while the woman he loved recovered from the miracle of bringing him into the world, Martin finally understood the meaning of the word, family. The return home and the second vows. 3 days after Diego's birth, Martin stood in the hospital hallway, holding a suitcase with the divorce papers in one hand and a bouquet of white peonies in the other. It was the day Beatrice and Diego would be discharged, and he knew this conversation would define the rest of their lives. Beatrice was sitting on the bed, dressed in a loose lavender cotton dress, feeding Diego with a naturalness that seemed magical to Martin. The last 3 days had been an emotional roller coaster of hospital visits, nights sleeping in the room's chair when Beatrice allowed it, and moments of silent connection as they contemplated their son together. "Ready to go home?" he asked, placing the flowers in the vase by the window. "Yes," she replied, delicately lifting Diego for a burp. "My mother already has everything ready." Martin sat in the chair next to the bed, the same one where he had fragmentedly slept for 3 nights. He had lost weight, had deep, dark circles, and his 3-day beard gave him a vulnerable look that contrasted with the sharp executive he had been for years. "Beatrice, we need to talk about us." She finished feeding Diego and placed him in his portable Moses basket, where he immediately fell asleep with that absolute ease of newborns. "I know," she murmured, smoothing her dress nervously. "These days have been confusing. I've seen you become a father." Her voice softened. "I've seen you cry when Diego grabbed your finger for the first time. I've seen you stay up all night just to make sure he was breathing okay. And for moments, I forgot all the pain and remembered why I fell in love with you." Martin felt a flicker of hope, but remained cautious. "And for moments, I remember the question you asked me that night. I remember the months you treated me like a stranger. I remember how alone I felt when I needed my husband most." Martin slowly pulled out the suitcase and put it on the side table. "That's why I brought this." Beatrice looked at the suitcase with apprehension. "What is it?" "The divorce papers I prepared months ago and never had the courage to sign." The color drained from Beatrice's face. "Martin, no!" He gently interrupted her. "Let me finish. I brought them because I want you to know that I completely understand if you decide it's too late for us. I want you to know that I will respect your decision, whatever it is." He opened the suitcase and took out the legal documents, but also a different folder. "But I also brought this." The second folder contained photographs of a house, a traditional southern 2-story house in the Victorian district, with an inner courtyard full of jasmine and a porch that overlooked the garden. "I bought it yesterday," Martin said. "It's 10 minutes from your mother's house. It has 4 bedrooms, an office so you can work from home, and a yard where Diego can play when he grows up." Beatrice took the photographs with trembling hands. "You bought it without consulting me. I bought it for Diego and for you if you decide to give us a second chance. If not, it will just be for Diego. For when he comes to visit me on weekends or holidays, or when he's older and wants to get to know his father." Tears began to roll down Beatrice's cheeks. "Martin, you can't buy my forgiveness with a house. I'm not trying to buy anything." He moved closer to her, but without touching her. "I'm trying to show you that I've completely changed my life, that these are not empty words. Richard is running the company in Boston. I am going to run the new Southern division from here. My life is here now, with you or without you. And what if it doesn't work? And if we try to rebuild our marriage and find out we're too broken to repair? It was the question Martin had been dreading, but for which he had an honest answer. Then at least we will have tried. At least Diego will see that his parents fought for their family before giving up. Beatrice looked toward the Moses basket where her son slept, then at the divorce documents, then at the photographs of the house, and finally at Martin. You know what hurt me most about everything that happened? Tell me. It wasn't the accusations. It wasn't even that you doubted Diego's paternity. It was that you gave up so easily. You preferred to believe in a non-existent betrayal rather than fight for us. Martin felt every word was a scalpel cutting directly into his soul. You're right, but I'm here now, and I'm not going to give up ever again. He knelt by the hospital bed, taking Beatrice's hands in his. I don't ask you to forget. I ask you to let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that I can be the man you deserved from the beginning. I ask you to let me love our son as he deserves. I ask you to let me love you as I should have loved you always. Beatrice looked at him for long seconds, studying his face as if memorizing every line, every expression. If we do this, Martin, if we try to rebuild our marriage, it has to be from scratch. We can't pretend the past didn't exist, but we can't live prisoners to it either. From scratch, he nodded, as if we were meeting for the first time. And you have to promise me something. Never, ever again doubt my fidelity. Never again investigate me as if I were a criminal. Never again prioritize your pride over our family. I promise you, his voice broke. I promise you that I will never again give you reason to feel alone in our marriage. Beatrice closed her eyes for an eternal moment, and when she opened them, Martin saw in them the decision that would change their destinies. All right, she whispered. Let's try. Martin stood up and kissed her softly, a kiss that tasted of forgiveness, second chances, and the promise of a future built on a stronger foundation. Beatrice took the divorce papers, and without reading them, she tore them in half. We won't need these. Martin helped her gather her things while she prepared Diego for the trip home. But as they were ready to leave, Beatrice stopped in the doorway of the room. Martin, one more thing. The next time we have a crisis, we talk. We don't run. We don't assume. We don't secretly investigate. We talk as adults who love each other. The next time we have a crisis, he corrected with a smile, because crises will come, but we'll face them together. They left the hospital under the Savannah sun, with Diego sleeping peacefully in his car seat, heading toward a life that would be different, better, and built on the unbreakable foundation of love they had rediscovered in a hospital room where their son had come into the world to unite them forever. The second spring. 2 years later. 2 years later. May 2025. The courtyard of the house in the Victorian district was bathed in the golden light of the Savannah sunset. The jasmine Martin had planted the first year now provided enough shade for Diego, now a 2-year-old boy with brown curls and curious eyes like his mother's, to play safely among the flowers, climbing the whitewashed walls. Beatrice sat in the wicker rocking chair on the porch, her hands resting on her belly, round once again. 6 months into her second pregnancy, she had that special glow Martin had learned to adore, multiplied now by the serenity of a woman who had found her perfect balance between motherhood, marriage, and professional career. "Daddy, Daddy!" Diego ran toward Martin with outstretched arms, holding a tiny soccer ball. Martin left the blueprints for the new sustainable housing project he was reviewing and crouched down to embrace his son. At 44, he had changed radically, his hair slightly longer, some premature gray that gave him distinction, and a more relaxed way of dressing that reflected his new life. That afternoon, he wore a white linen shirt with rolled-up sleeves and beige chinos, a world away from the corporate suits that had defined his identity for so long. "Shall we play a bit before dinner?" he asked, picking up Diego. "Yes!" the boy shouted with the pure joy of a 2-year-old. For the next 20 minutes, the yard filled with laughter as father and son played with the ball. Beatrice watched them with a smile that was once again genuine, complete, without the shadows of sadness that had accompanied her during the months of separation. The Hayes Energy Southern Division office had turned out to be an unexpected success. Martin had discovered that his business mind worked even better when he wasn't constantly stressed, and the local team he had built shared his vision for sustainable development that respected the Southern heritage. "Time for bath, little one," Beatrice announced when Diego began to show signs of tiredness. "I don't want to," Diego protested, but he was already running toward his mother with outstretched arms. As Beatrice took Diego inside for his nightly routine, Martin collected the toys scattered across the patio and watered the new plants they had added that spring. The house had grown with them. They had converted one of the rooms into a studio for Beatrice, where she designed projects for clients across Georgia. Another room was being prepared for the arrival of their second child, a daughter they had decided to name Sophia. Martin's phone rang, showing Richard's name on the screen. "How are things going in Boston?" Martin asked, sitting on the porch steps. "Excellent. Second quarter numbers are the best in company history." Richard's voice sounded satisfied. "And you, how is domestic life?" Martin looked toward the bathroom window, where he could see the silhouettes of Beatrice and Diego playing with soap bubbles. "I wouldn't trade a single day of this life for all the corporate victories in the world. I don't even miss the adrenaline of the big negotiations. The adrenaline I feel every morning when Diego wakes me up by climbing into my bed, or when Beatrice tells me about her day, or when I feel Sophia move in her mother's belly. That adrenaline is infinitely better than any $1,000,000 contract." After hanging up, Martin went inside. The house smelled of lavender and the dinner they had prepared together that afternoon: gazpacho, fried seafood, and tomato salad. He found Beatrice in Diego's room, reading him a story as the boy fought sleep from his small, blue-painted wooden bed. "And the prince and the princess lived happily ever after," Beatrice finished, closing the book softly. "Like us," Diego mumbled, already half asleep. Martin approached and kissed his son's forehead. "Good night, champion. Good night, Dad. Tomorrow we play again. Tomorrow and every day." Once Diego was asleep, Martin and Beatrice headed to their bedroom. It was a simple but cozy room, with light wood furniture and family photographs on the nightstands. The king-size bed had been replaced by a smaller one that forced them to sleep closer together, something they had both come to deeply value. Beatrice sat at the dressing table to brush her hair, now longer and with some golden highlights she had added at the local salon. She wore a peach-colored cotton nightgown that perfectly accommodated her pregnancy. "How do you feel?" Martin asked, gently massaging her shoulders. "Heavy but happy." She leaned back against him. "Sophia is very active today. I think she's going to be a soccer player like her brother." Martin put his hands on her belly and felt the strong, determined kicks of his unborn daughter. "Did you ever think we would get here?" he asked. "Did you ever, during the worst moments, believe we could rebuild this?" Beatrice turned in the chair to look at him directly. "There were days I was sure it was impossible. Days I thought the damage was too deep to repair." She placed her hand on his cheek. "But I never completely stopped loving you. Even when I hated you, I loved you. And that scared me more than anything else. I loved you too, even when I acted like I didn't. But I didn't know how to be vulnerable, how to admit I was afraid of losing you. You don't have to be afraid anymore. She smiled tenderly. We've learned to talk, to trust, to build something real instead of a perfect fantasy. They lay down together, with Beatrice nestled against Martin's chest and his hand over the belly that held their second daughter. Outside, Savannah prepared for the night with the distant sound of flamenco guitar from a neighboring courtyard and the scent of jasmine intensifying with the night humidity. "Martin," Beatrice murmured just before falling asleep, "thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for letting me." The divorce papers Beatrice had torn up 2 years ago at the hospital had turned to ash in the wind, replaced by house renovation plans, birthday photographs, Diego's drawings on the refrigerator, and the absolute certainty that sometimes second chances can be even more beautiful than first loves. Under the starry Savannah sky, the Hayes Vance family slept in peace, protected by a love that had survived the storm and emerged stronger, more real, and more enduring than ever. Conclusion and final call to action. Would you have made the same decision as Beatrice to give love a second chance? Or do you believe some wounds are too deep to heal? Share your reflection in the comments. True love always deserves a second chance. Or are there limits that once crossed cannot be repaired? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you liked the story, subscribe to our channel and leave a comment telling us what you thought. Your comments and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.